Hello, everyone. A while back, I gave a list of games I'm keeping an eye on. Path of Exile 2 was one of the many games that I listed. I didn't comment on it at the time because I haven't played Path of Exile in a very long time. I didn't want to make comments that were inaccurate or out of date, so naturally I waited until I could do some reading, open Path of Building, community fork, and just take a look at everything. I've been doing that on and off for several days now to try to catch up on Path of Exile, just to make sure that I'm as current as possible. That said, I am now up to date, and I will go ahead and go over my experiences with Path of Exile 1 to kind of give you some ideas to what I'm about to say, or potentially comments that tie into it. So, for me, what was the most fun with Path of Exile 1 was theory crafting. That is to take a build and chunk it into Path of Building Calculator to see what the numbers would be and whether or not the build would be viable. To me, that was the most fun. However, that was short lived because I realized something after several years of playing, and one of the many reasons that I eventually quit was because I noticed in Path of Building Calculator, no matter how many builds I could come up with, it always came back to the builds that were using elemental, specifically melee or spells. Without a fail, they did more than any other build that I could conjure up, like bow builds or even the wacky builds, like using Facebreaker or was it like Doriani's Fist or something like that. Yeah, I've tried builds like those and consistently have not been able to do better, numbers wise, than the melee elemental or the spell elementals builds. It's just the way it's always been. I did bust out Path of Building Community Fork. That's actually what I downloaded to kind of help me see what was going on because I learned it was the most up to date. And it's still the same way as before I quit. So to me, that's kind of frustrating because it's like there are so many possibilities, but it doesn't matter because the only things that really get you far in Path of Exile are those two specific builds, whatever they may be using whatever items. That was one of the things that I would say was a contributing factor to me quitting. Another contributing factor was just how stale Path of Exile was at the time, and it still is to a certain degree. It's because people consistently use the same builds as each other. Whenever a build's successful, somebody's going to copy it, and it's just going to be a repeat cycle. Every season or new expansion, a build's getting copied. It's such a cookie cutter slash copy and paste game. It really is. There's no one really trying new stuff in mass. It's always going to come back to a specific build. To me, that's very, very disappointing to see. The game has a lot of different potential outcomes in terms of the builds, but nobody wants to explore it because it's too complicated for them. Now, I'm not blaming the players for that. That's more of a fault of the game. Because they made everything so complicated, there's no desire for people to really venture outside of their comfort zone and try a new build. That's just how the game is. The other contributing factor to that specific problem is in the fact that there's no way to just completely redo the build other than deleting the character and starting from level 1. So you can't take a character to like level 60 and then forget everything. It's just not possible. There's not enough ways to do that. So it doesn't help with that either. I would say the next contributing factor that caused me to quit Path of Exile was On top of realizing that it's always the elemental builds, I realized it's also a game of stacking. Frenzy charges, endurance charges, shock, ignite, whatever you could stack, the more you could stack of it, the better your DPS was. So, in addition to all the other prior mentioned issues, it always has been a game of stacking. Stack as many things as you can, that's how you achieve damage. So, it's another element of the game where it just hasn't changed. And that's also very frustrating to see. There are plenty more things I could say that contributed to my quitting, but I'll go ahead and cut it short and go right into Path of Exile 2. So, Path of Exile 2. I hope that they correct the issues mentioned, but I hope that they don't correct the issues in such a way that it takes away from the game. It needs to have a healthy balance between having room to theorycraft and being more friendly to players in terms of being able to understand them, do their own builds, so on and so forth. What I mean by healthy balance is, let me use Diablo 2 for example. I still think Diablo 2 is a great game. Maybe not the remaster. I'm kind of on the fence about that one. But Diablo 2 in general, I thought was a great game. It was very straightforward and to the point. Easy to understand every skill because all you did was just looked at the multiplier involved and then you looked at the weapon and then you times that. That's all you had to do. It was very, very simple and straightforward because you didn't need a calculator or anything. All the math that you needed to figure out a particular build was right there in front of you. So, yeah, even though Diablo 2 had the same issue as Path of Exile in terms of the staleness with the builds, it was at least very simple to do. It was something that, you could just go in, chunk something together, and see the end game. But Path of Exile, not so much. You couldn't just chunk something together and hope to see the end of the game. So yes, I hope that they have a healthy balance between being able to figure out things in-game and still having room to theorycraft, because that was one of my issues with Diablo 2. Even though I thought it was a great game, there was just no room to theorycraft like I do with Path of Exile. So that's what I'm kind of meaning by balance. I would also say, in addition to keeping that healthy balance, I would say make things a lot easier to understand. There is certainly a lot of things in the game that I think could just be worded better. For example, Glancing Blow, I think is its name. It's that keystone passive sitting right next to the Templar start. It says that you take 65% damage from blocks, but you gain double block. So when that first came out, and I saw it on the passive tree, it confused the heck out of me for a while until it finally dawned on me that it was trying to tell you you take 35% damage from blocks rather than the full block. Essentially what it's doing is it's saying, well, now you're going to take damage from blocking, but we're going to make it easier for you to block. That kind of makes things balance each other out in terms of the damage received, because now it's trying to eliminate the game of RNG, more or less. Something like that could be easily rewarded. Something like you no longer stop damage from blocking, you now take 35% of the damage you block. That would have been a far simpler way of wording it, and I would have understood that clear as day had it been worded like that. Yeah, I think that they certainly could have made things a little bit easier in the wording just to kind of help understand things. I think another thing, too, that they can do to kind of help that is try to, I guess, have a clearer mechanic as well, I guess is where I'm going with this. One of the many things that I noticed in Path of Building that was super weird to me is according to Path of Building, the plus flat accuracy and plus percent accuracy nodes accounted for more damage than a two-handed or even one-handed melee node. I think it's called Precision by Templar. Precision has been worth 11,000 damage, or I'm sorry, DPS, by itself. When you compare that to whatever your equivalent build is, which is either going to be one-handed or two-handed melee elemental, if you look at the two-handed node, it's only worth about 2,000 to 10. No, actually 8. Yeah, 8. 2 to 8. Yeah, that's right. So accuracy combined with attack speed does more than flat damage. Like, it just, that does not make sense at all. I would have thought that because it was such a low percent of attack speed that the raw damage would have been better, but nope. It's beaten by like 3,000 DPS. So it would be nice if they not only cleared up the wording, but made the mechanics and the number triggering a little bit easier to understand as well. Whether that be an encyclopedia in the game, or maybe just making it so accuracy doesn't include damage. I don't know. But definitely something. That would be a start. Yeah, so I would say the final thing that I can think of for Path of Exile 2, I think that would go a long ways in terms of making the game better, as also cleaning up the uniques. There are a lot of uniques that are just completely useless in terms of the numbers anyways. I'm sure that somebody can make a build with them, but I'm saying, like, if you were to chunk it into Path of Building Calculator, without a fail, there are only a handful of uniques in the game that achieve stupid high numbers. Multiplication or flat, whatever it may be, it's always without a fail going to be a handful of the uniques. But the rest of the uniques in the game, they don't matter. One such example I can give is the Fulcrum. You would think that it would do a lot of damage given that it's a staff and it's converting everything to elemental, because, like I said, everything to do with melee elemental or spell elemental is without the fail the best numbers in Path of Building. But no, it's not the case with Fulcrum, because Fulcrum is not only lower level, but it's also just not achieving enough numbers. Oh, and another example I can give to kind of show you where I'm going with this comment. The one unique called Hiltless. Without a fail, Hiltless has done more numbers-wise than a perfectly rolled Exquisite Blade. So obviously you would do Hiltless for critical strike builds, but if you compared it to a perfectly rolled Exquisite Blade in Path of Building Calculator, without a fail, Hiltless just does more. It is super frustrating to see that. Super frustrating. So yeah, those are kind of my hopes in summary for Path of Exile 2. I do want it to be more friendlier of a game, so more people get into it. I also want more people to be able to do their own builds instead of copying and pasting whatever builds in the forums and things like that. Clean up the uniques, clean up the text, mechanics, all of that. Just clean it all up. That would be fantastic. That's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.